Nutrien. We do have, my job is to provide agronomic advice to address agronomy and sustainability of fertilizers that we manufacture. Probably most of what I'm going to talk today about management of saline areas would encourage you to not utilize fertilizer on forages, in particular sulfur, and in the case of, in most saline areas, little or no fertilizer, very contrary to most forage growing areas. But we do have a very good guide, the Forage Nutrient Management Guide. It's a very unbiased, non-product oriented guide. If you're interested, if you Google economics with a K and forage guide, you will find the forage guide as well as guides to things like potatoes and corn and canola. This is a bit of perspective, and a lot of you in the room are cattle people. I think observe profitability in crop people. It's maybe a bit of a broad statement, but if a cow isn't productive, if a cow doesn't produce a calf, you kill it, right? It's gone. You cull it. We say it. Use the nice word cull. Orchardists, people who have orchards, commercial orchards, are also cruel to their crop. If that apple species is not producing a profitable crop, you cut the trees down and start over, or graft into it and start over. There's no room for non-profitability in horticulture. Same thing as stores. If Tim Hortons has 10 stores and one of them isn't profitable, you close it and you reallocate your resources to the profitable stores. But in annual cropping, in particular, I think in Western Canada, if we have non-profitable annual cropping acres, we just try again. We accept that we don't make money per acre because we have a tendency to farm acres than to farm for profit. Overall in Saskatchewan, we would make more money by farming less land. There's no doubt. There's a lot of reasons that some soil is marginal. And these are a long list of probable reasons that soils can be non-profitable and marginal for annual production in Western Canada. By far the primary one is salinity. It's a big issue. It covers a lot of acres. The potential to fix salinity, to have it removed, is very, very low. And on top of that, if you don't address the problem of salinity, it will grow within your field. The salinity will expand. What is salinity? I think we need to address that because there's some misconceptions, especially in terms of things that people sell to what is salinity. And salinity is simply a high concentration of salts in the soil. And those salts are pairs of cations and anions. So table salt is sodium chloride, sodium being the cation, chloride the anion. In soils, our primary cations are sodium, calcium, magnesium, and they will be paired with sulfates, chloride, and carbonates. But by and large, the primary anions involved are sulfates, and the primary cations in most of our soils is magnesium. We also can measure salinity, but we don't measure it by actually measuring the amounts of salts. You can measure total dissolved solids in soil and have a very accurate measure of salinity. But we utilize the ability of salts to carry electrical charges within soil, and that is how we tend to measure salinity. So when you look at a soil test sheet, you'll see electrical conductivity, and it's simply putting an anode and a cathode into this slurry or a mixture of soil and water, and measuring the ability of that mixture to carry an electrical charge. So on your soil test sheet, you'll see EC, electrical conductivity, and that is then translated to a measure of salinity. Generally, we measure salinity in terms of, you'll see millisiemens per centimeter. It's a measure of electrical conductivity within soil. Salinity is a big deal in Western Canada. This is a map from a paper published probably, not sure now, probably close to 20 years ago, well, 2006, yeah, it's right in front of me, close to 20 years ago, which estimated the current level of salinity as well as the risk to salinity. And salinity is a big deal. It currently affects about 2.5 million acres in Western Canada, and predominantly in Saskatchewan, as you can see in the map, and a high risk for that salinity to expand. If you want to look at it, other maps, one of my favorite platforms to look at almost every day in terms of soil is the SaskSys website, Saskatchewan Soil Information website, fantastic resource developed right here at the University of Saskatchewan, where you can filter to different soil parameters. And this is yesterday, I just filtered to any soil that has slight, moderate, or severe salinity, or moderate and severe salinity. There is a lot of salinity across Saskatchewan. And even at that slight is essentially a definition of where it would begin to reduce the yield of annual crops. Now, there has been some changes, not just over the course of 20 years, probably over the course of 30 or 40 years. Now, the risk of salinity in some cases has declined because we have removed summer fallow from most rotations. Summer fallow increases the amount of groundwater within a given landscape. That then allows the groundwater and associated salts to move to the surface of the soil. We've largely stopped fallowing. However, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, as land values increase and the obsession with farming acres rather than farming profitable acres, we are often encroaching on marginal land that is in fact non-profitable. You bought the land, you want to farm it, but I'm going to lose money every year growing crops on it. How salinity develops? It's very simple. Salinity as a soil issue is actually conceptually very simple, in that it is simply salts within the rooting profile of a given crop. How they get there is largely a matter of scale. Which there are many large ones in Saskatchewan, the best example being the Cowell Basin. We have freshwater, rainwater collecting in upland areas, moving down through a profile, eventually coming across a conductive layer of soil. So for whatever reason, that water starts to move sideways rather than continuing to move downward. It's not that this soil is saline, but over the course of tens or hundreds of years, slowly adds soluble salts to that water, and 10 or 100 miles away comes to the surface. It may come to the surface even as flowing wells. In the case of the Quill Lakes and the lower elevation regions around the Quill Lakes, it simply develops a salinity in any low area. Really have any meaningful interjection to reducing this issue, and you will always find it on the lowest elevation areas of a given region. We often have, over the course of decades, to talk about saline seeps, and these are more localized, where within the same field you might have a high area where water is moving into the soil, hitting again a conductive layer, allowing the water and salts to move sideways. Eventually the water evaporates from the soil surface and leaves salts on the surface. This is not necessarily occurring on the lowest part of the landscape within a field. It may occur even in the mid-slope of a field, where you might have that conductive soil layer moving that salt and water to the soil surface. This is to some degree manageable if you can intercept the water both at the recharge and discharge areas. And then we have this one, which all of you have seen, where we have what we call evaporating rings, a ring of salt around a semi-permanent, maybe a permanent water body. It might be a dugout, it might be a sewage lagoon, it might be a highway ditch. So this is what's happening in most highway ditches. When you see salinity along the edge of a field, you have water collecting in that ditch or in your dugout or in your lagoon, moving downward out the bottom of that water body, which may not be there for more than a few weeks each year, hitting a less permeable, you end up with a perched water table, And we end up with having, again, water moving to the surface and leaving salts deposited on the surface, often in a ring around a slough, a ring around a lagoon, a ring around a dugout, or along the edge of a highway ditch. These, again, are to large case, can be at least understand, and we can visually see the variance of salts across a landscape, but there is also variance within the soil profile. And a soil profile may be saline without it actually impacting the yield of a crop. If you have a very saline subsoil, and if those salts have not get to the root zone, then it doesn't matter. If you continue this on to not seedbed, it becomes a much bigger. To remove the salts, probably it is almost impossible to truly remove the salts from the landscape or from the profile, but to keep those salts at a depth so that they are not impacting the yield of the crop that is growing there. It becomes a water management issue, not a salt management issue. We often see the same spot in a field in the spring. All the salts have dissolved by spring runoff and they've been pushed down into the soil profile. Later, by August comes, the salts are again there on the surface. Sometimes people will try some type of method or product to apply to soil or to manage the soil, and it might rain an inch or two, and they think that they fixed the problem. It hasn't. It hasn't at all. The salts are still there, and they will come back to the surface with time. So if someone tries to sell you something to cure salinity, it is best to use applied just before a rain. Now, when things really go wrong, again, is when those salts move into the seed bed. And you'll see areas within fields that sometimes they're pretty good. Actually, a lot of salinity disappeared for a little while this spring because we had some good rains and a lot of seed germinated in areas that often couldn't germinate. But then summer got dry, the salt moved to the surface and started to kill the crops again. And this is every year in most saline areas. Salts will move down, they'll move back up within the seed bed. Now, the problem with annual crops is that they have to germinate every year. A couple points here too that I often see confused. The simple point that pH and salinity are not directly related. Lime will not fix salinity, neither will gypsum. And there are no miracles in soil science. Let's talk a little bit about the tolerance of crops to salinity. Now, in most publications, if you're reading about tolerance, it will say that 4 millisiemens per centimeter is the critical point of crop tolerance to salinity. The problem is that most of these references are talking about a saturated paste measurement. We don't measure salinity using saturated paste because it's hard. So soil tests, you can hear that. My shirt might cause somebody to have a stroke. That's not coming from me, I don't think. It's coming from someone else. No, not just me. When I talk, it's worse. Oh, no, I'm not. It's back. If this goes badly, I'll just turn it. A 1-to-1 ratio or 2-to-1 ratio, and you'll see that in a soil test. And as a rule of thumb, the standard then is about EC. Whoever's organizing the slides and meetings today, I can share this chart. But what I have done is convert the standard measures in saturated paste to a 1-to-1 measure and given an idea of what you can grow within that same range of salinity. I won't spend any more time on that chart, but I'll make it available. It tends to not be affected up until a critical point of salinity. In most cases, it's a salinity measurement of yield loss is quite linear. Now, if it's some crops are have a much steeper decline, a much quicker yield loss than other crops. I've alluded to this point already, but in terms of cures for salinity, there are none. There are nothing that I can sell you or anyone else can sell you unless you sell forage seed that will cure salinity. The reason is the volume. A typical loam soil in Saskatchewan of about 8 tons of salt to a 2-foot depth. You're not going to remove that with any given product, the salinity, by measuring the water. But we can feel it's a bit of a move in some regions of Western Canada. This could work and has been proven to work in some areas. Tiling is a big, complex topic, and I would approach it even more cautiously than spraying with drones. You can spend a tremendous amount of money with no success. But the bigger and very low-cost solution to salinity, again, very low-cost solution to salinity, again, measuring or managing not the salinity, but the soil water, is to use forage. Many forages are very, very tolerant to salinity. In fact, they do very, very high, and others. And on top of that, then, we have to think about is to start managing completely, not here. I don't think anything's happening.
Test.
I have to get very close. Okay, so the point here, we're going to stop spending money on that crappy soil along the edge of the road. We're going to see forages there, and we might not even make any money there, but we'll stop losing money, and we're going to take that money and spend it on the rest of it. And we need to then vary not just our now in terms of soil fertility, as I said, I'm going to kill some nutrient sales here. In saline areas, almost any saline area will have a net accumulation of nitrogen within that landscape and not growing crops. And so there tends to be a lot of residual N. Tends to be a multiple generational supply of sulfates. So here is a fantastic opportunity to variable rate fertilize. I'm going to show a couple of case studies and look at the variability within the saline landscape and how it could be managed. This is a drone picture of that field. And all of these brown areas, they tolerant. The farm is also encroaching into it so that we see the white map with about 10 or 12 year satellite imagery. And we can see that where the yields are actually on average growing there. The university has not been managing this. The red area almost never. Areas are okay. In terms of salinity and in terms of this severely saline, the blue areas, which are profitable, are not saline. Sampling this field with a random soil sample and not actually measure salinity. The EC in the sample was actually quite low and turned on saline. So this is the available nutrients within those given areas. Again, we see in the poor areas, quite high levels of nitrate and nitrogen. The farmers continue to those areas without growing a crop. And we see very high levels of sulfate, especially in the very saline areas. Now we can predict the yield of wheat within that field or any other crop simply using this similar type of predictive yield measurement. And I'm basing this on some work that is published by Holm in 1983 in similar soils. And using that very simple equation, you can predict yield losses within the given regions of that field. Loss with wheat. Whereas as we go into the more productive areas, we finally get to the blue areas, which is essentially non-saline or very slightly saline, and then leads to the next. You can use variable rate fertilizer application within the field to address the yield potential. So for example, it's not going to be much yield potential, and there's significant residual N, so the recommendation would be to apply no nitrogen, which are productive and per acre to achieve the 50 bushels per crop and 50. So this is the profitability of the good of the field. So looking at what you're making forages, applying that same logic, the same equations to predict alfalfa 39%, and then we get down to saltlander green saline, and so they become very, very productive if you use the right forage. So what is Well, it's saline, it's growing kochia, it's producing glyphosate-tolerant kochia to spread across the rest of your. Give it up and farm the most productive land. I put this in. And many of. I'm going to show this one slide. This is a very, very saline. Studies built into this. This is a very, very saline slough. That's a potash, slate potash mine. Look, salts aren't gone. There the salts are, right on the soil surface, producing a tremendous amount of hay though in that same area. Because of that, and for that reason, some crops differently, choose different crops. This is a win for the farmer. It's a win for the environment. It is not being bad. And on top of that, last word heard in Saskatchewan, because we have a tremendous amount of potential to produce very good quality forages over from here. And I'll turn it over from here. Thank you.
Perfect. Council. Stacy is a mission programming environment. Stacy, and we welcome Stacy.
I'm just going to give you a bit of an update on results. Kind of go over our funding. So who is the BCRC? We support research that contributes to the competitiveness and sustainability of our Canadian beef industry, and we are funded by producer research. We're led by producers representing all of the provinces and areas in Saskatchewan here. We're led by producers representing all of the provinces and areas in Saskatchewan here. So we are funded by checkoff, which means we have a group of producers that is. Try this one. Oh, there we go. All right. So we're producer led, meaning these are the people that are ultimately making